Welcome back, everybody, to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. I am so thrilled to introduce you to our next guest. We have Auditi Chakravarty, the CEO of AERDF. Welcome, Aditi. How are you?
I'm doing so well. How are you, Haley?
I am fantastic. You and I had a happenstance meeting in San Diego last year,
Yeah.
and it was very clear to me that we really had to collaborate on this podcast because you have so much happening in your world and so much relevant, especially due to current events, relevant conversations being had around research and education, and the purpose of it and how we can advance student learning. So I'm thrilled to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm really thrilled to be here. I enjoyed our happenstance meeting, and look, this is what it's paying off, and we're finally getting a chance to do this.
So in case anybody's ever wondering if going to ASU GSV is worth it, this is your proof right
There we
here.
go.
Aditi, can you please tell our audience how you came to be the personal and professional version of yourself?
Oh, such a big question. There's a big version of it. There's a narrower version of it. I mean, I think that for me, it does start from being the child of immigrants and having a very, very specific immigrant experience, um, landing in the rural Midwest at a particular point in time. I was born in the 70s, in a time when there weren't a lot of people who looked like me, who came from my cultural and linguistic background. Growing up in that part of the country, I think I would have had a really different experience had my parents emigrated to New Jersey or even to Chicago, and instead it was Nebraska. And
Mm.
then I grew up in rural central Illinois. And so, everything about my schooling experience and being the only and being different, I think was a big part of my personal version of myself that I am today, and a lot of what's motivated me and really helped instill in me an understanding of why things like belonging matter in learning environments, and how important that is. Um, so as a kid, like I loved English, I loved math. I wasn't sure when I went to college, what am I going to major in? What am I going to study? I ended up majoring in English, and I thought I was going to become a lawyer. But I realized as I was in college and preparing and thinking about that, I thought I should be a lawyer, but I didn't really have models in my life for what a profession in the law could look like, partly because of where I grew up. And in my family, my family were all engineers and doctors. And then my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, had been a professor. And so teaching felt like, of those, the most interesting opportunity for me to pursue. But it was also, there were a lot of things in my schooling and college experience that illustrated for me the what happens when you're limited by lack of access. But
Mm.
also on the other side, I was so enabled by a multi-generational commitment to education. So much of my early experience was lack of access to rigorous coursework. There were no AP courses where I went to school. I didn't even get to take calculus until I got to college, and that's a really hard place to take calculus for the first
Mm.
time, and is probably a reason I didn't pursue a math major and I ended up becoming an English major instead. And at the same time, it was never in doubt that I would go to college, that I would go to grad school, that I would do something that with an education. And so those things were also very formative for me, and as I became an educator, and I was an educator. I was a high school teacher. um, I love teaching. And at the same time, I think my big reflection now, 25, 30 years later, is wow, we throw young adults into the hardest job there is.
And the most
Um,
important job,
the hardest
right?
job, hardest, most important job there is. So ill prepared. You're especially you're teaching high school, you're only a few years older than the students you're teaching. Really ill prepared for the magnitude of the task. And I think, particularly as my subsequent post-teaching career, I've learned so much about the science of learning or the science of measurement, and about, learning and development writ large. You don't learn any of that when you're learning to
Right.
teach, right? So that there is so little focus on really understanding a child's brain, and how, as an educator, or how the learning environment really develops learning in young children. It was just not something that I was prepared for as a teacher. And so much of my work since then has been thinking about how do we bring that into the hands of educators, into programs, into products, into systems, in a way that I feel like, gosh, if I'd known those things, if I had those things, I might have, done things differently or better, or just, felt more prepared. So, I think that that's a large part of that combination of the personal and the professional that's brought me to where I am.
I appreciate you sharing the journey that you've had in education, both how your family impacted your trajectory, but also the unique experiences you had being the only person of color in your community, not having examples for the careers that you wanted to pursue growing up in rural America. Most of America is rural. And most of the students in this country are having not the same experiences, but similar experiences akin to the ones that you had. And so
Yeah.
it's really helpful to hear how you reflect on that and also how it drove you to pursue the work you do today, in order to ensure that we're providing and building systems that are research based and practical in their implementations.
Yeah, and expansive and create room for young people to be all of those things.
Incredible. Yeah. So I really care a lot about research and implementation science. And I always credit my former colleague, Dr. Kelsey Young, for this. So I am really excited about diving into talking about the work you
Yeah.
do at AirDef. So it's a relatively young organization, launched in 2021. What gap in the ecosystem did you see that led to its creation?
Yeah, I mean, the big gap is sort of as I spoke to before. There's really this complete disconnect historically between the learning sciences and the education ecosystem, education, the marketplace where products are developed, and also schools and school environments. We at ERDF we've talked a lot about them being completely siloed from one another, and really importantly, that the way that education, research, and development, to the extent that it happens for product development or that education research happens, that learners and educators are effectively shut out of the process. The experience that teachers and students typically have with research is that it is done to them
Mm,
or it is done about them, but not with them, right? Not with them at the table. And I think the result of that, and we believe the results of that, can be seen in long-standing, persistent inequities, real challenges in learning environments and products that don't work, that the things that scale are not the things that work, and vice versa. Um, the failure of the system to really figure out how to coordinate across capital R&D efforts and commercialization efforts in a way that's really coordinated to say, let's all solve problems together. Let's all
mm.
solve big problems together. Let's achieve breakthroughs. And let's do that by always centering teachers and learners in the process. So AERDF was launched with a view to say, let's let's try to do this differently. AERDF was itself was sort of an experiment. It itself was a form of R&D to say
Mm,
other sectors have figured out how to do R&D better, more effectively, with an orientation to breakthroughs that can really change the status quo. The education sector hasn't figured out how to do it. How
mm.
can we learn from other sectors, apply some of those same practices, adapt them for the realities of education and for environments where teachers and learners are, and then see if we can, through this, build a new capability for the field to do R&D differently, and also actually achieve some breakthroughs through the programs that we run.
Okay, so in the ecosystem, there's various stakeholders that are going to be impacted by this call to action. I'm wondering, like, what is the general response from, let's say, ed tech vendors as this push goes forward? Are you seeing, like, I look at other organizations that have similar orientations to require or call for research to be at the center, but I also know that your advanced inclusive R&D is a different lens. So let maybe we'll start there. Let's talk about why it's a different lens. And you've talked a little bit around this so far on this call, but let's like really call it out, how you define it and what makes it different than traditional research, and then I'll get to people's reaction to it after.
Yeah, I mean, I'll simply break down advanced inclusive R&D. The advanced piece is that we work at the edge of current knowledge and technology to push beyond existing boundaries. So advanced comes from the fact that we're kind of anchored in and inspired by DARPA, or ARPA energy. So that's what the advanced speaks to. So advanced R&D is different from incremental R&D or evaluative R&D, right? We're actually pushing at the edge of knowledge and technology. Inclusive is what I've spoken to. We include educators and learners as fellow experts from the start. The idea here is that they are untapped sources of wisdom about what works for whom and under what conditions. As a researcher, that is the big question. What works for whom and
Mhm.
under what conditions? So much of the typical ways we do research don't allow us to answer that. But when you start with learners and teachers, you're able to get to that in a much richer way. And then lastly, the R&D. We apply rapid cycles of kind of iterative prototyping, measurement, and evaluation, iterating at each turn to answer questions about efficacy, usability, and usefulness. All of those are important. You have to know that it works. You have to know that it's usable, and you have to know that it's useful. And these iterative cycles of R&D allow us to do that. And this advanced inclusive R&D methodology is applied within programs that are time limited to 4 to 5 years. And that time limiting is also by design to kind of almost force that focus and deliberateness to unlock answers to those questions in that amount of time. And if it's not possible, or the answer is no, this doesn't work, it really can actually um, speed up the pathway to knowing what works and what doesn't.
So the second part of my question, I'm very selfish about, I'll be honest with you, because I would like to conduct research and not exactly the research you're describing, obviously. I'm conducting more traditional evaluative research, but it's actually occurring through all of Full Mind's implementations from start to finish so that we could tweak programs and ensure that we're actually getting the outcomes that we expect to get with the implementations we're putting in. But I'm selfish here. So I know I'm excited about that. I know not every ed tech vendor is excited about doing research, but that's something Full Mind holds near and dear to its heart. The challenge that we often face is that it's another to-do list item for school members, community members. So that's a barrier. So when we collect research, you often have to go through enormously long processes. It results in limited amount of data sets that we're able to collect and analyze to ensure quality implementations. Perhaps this is not a barrier you face, but I'm wondering like how you overcome and ensure everybody's bought into this to help ensure that you're able to continually qualify what your hypotheses are.
Well, I think I mean, look, this is a core to where I think this idea of inclusive R&D, where centering educator and learner needs and problems from the start, is so important, right? If from the beginning you're saying we're starting with saying this isn't our research and we want your help with it. This is something that you care about and is a problem
Mhm.
you wish to solve. So for example, when our EF Plus Math program, one of the projects as part of our EF Plus Math program, which is a program that is seeking to understand how strengthening executive function skills can help learners be much more able to manage things like their working memory and their attention and their emotions while they're engaging in mathematical problem solving or conceptual understanding. So at the beginning of that program, when one of the research, the R&D teams that we started working with is a team out of University of California, Irvine, that was developing that wanted to really understand the role of embodied learning, this idea that movement and cognition are very connected, and how can that help us to answer these like the core hypotheses around executive function skills and strengthen math learning. So what they didn't build something and then go to a
Sure.
school and say, will you
Right.
test it with us? They said, let's find a school partner that is as interested in we are in kind of harnessing the power of movement. And then in collaboration with the school district in Southern California, they defined from the beginning what's the problem area that you want to solve? So it came from the teachers. Fractions. Fractions are really hard.
Mm,
And as math educators know, fractions are kind of a linchpin to
mm,
any advanced math and to getting to algebra and advanced mathematics. And so they honed in on fractions as the problem they wanted to solve. They honed in on where they thought they could most apply the research around embodied learning to solving a problem that they had to solve. And from this early partnership came fraction ball, which is now being used in schools throughout Southern California. We have multiple research sites. Um, but what was so interesting in that first few phases of iteration was that it wasn't only the teachers, it was also students informing, okay, so what does this look like on a basketball court? What does this look like in a classroom? What are the realities of being able to play fraction ball in a classroom? Well, we don't have a basketball court in a classroom. So students came up with creative ideas for what classroom-based activities could look like. And there was something about the authenticity of starting from there, from the beginning, that now as the fraction ball team has gone to additional sites and communities to say, hey, do you want to be a part of this with us? Absolutely, because you can kind of
yeah,
see and feel when teachers and when
right.
educators and learners have designed the thing, you can see and feel that it's really
Mm,
authentically different. And now what we're finding, which is really cool to me, is schools are coming up with further iterations of what implementing fraction ball could look
mm,
like. So we have a district where the PE teachers said, hey, this could work really well in our physical education setting because we don't have
right.
a curriculum. And this is a way the kids are moving and they're learning at the same time. And so now you have collaboration emerging between PE and math educators around fraction ball. And those are examples. And again, throughout in the background are research studies. We have been running research studies throughout the whole thing. We have
Mm.
statistically significant evidence of the effectiveness of fraction ball, but it's so much more because of that inclusive approach. So I think that's a big part of it. It's not all of it, and it is hard. And then there's all the realities, as you said, there's data sharing and all of those things that are complicated and necessary. But if you start with
Mm.
saying this is a problem you as a district have or need your learners and teachers have, so let's solve it together. I think that is a big step toward really developing a partnership.
I'm taking two big things away from this. One is you're reinforcing this idea of design thinking, which has been a theme recently on all of my podcast episodes. I don't know what's in the water, but maybe we're all embracing a little bit more of the co-design process, and that ultimately has so many benefits, which we can nerd out on another episode about. But I really appreciate you focusing in on that. And the buy-in is so huge. Working with someone to solve their challenges, it's not about me, it's about you and it's about us together, which I love. And then the second thing I'm taking away from this conversation is that my fourth grader, who loves fractions but hasn't mastered them quite yet, he hasn't started school, but started them last year in third grade. We need to play fraction ball.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely. We'll get you connected to fraction ball. We'll make it happen,
my
Haley.
cousin who lives down the street just built a basketball court. I'm gonna get some tape out, and I just Googled it as we're chatting here, and I already know what's happening next. I'm very excited about this. Just to shift gears for a second, we are in the age of rapidly developing technology, and at the forefront of this is artificial intelligence. It's making its way into almost every conversation, much the way design thinking is making its way into my conversations. And I'm just wondering, as AI really evolves and as we see schools grappling with how, where, when, what you see as the promise for AI in advancing teaching and learning, and then also what concerns you.
Yes, yes. Well, we know in the ed tech world, AI is all we talk about all the time. And so I've had a lot of time to think about this. So I think AI is very exciting for a few reasons. We know that AI is great at doing certain things like reading, like summarizing. It's really good at creating content based on source material or prompts. It brings a lot of power that I think can be time saving. I know for me as a professional at work, it can be time saving. I use it as an efficiency tool. And I think the opportunity for AI to be both a time saver and efficiency driver for teachers is huge, right? I spoke earlier about my own experience as a teacher and being overwhelmed, and just the
Mm.
number of things that we put on teachers, where the most powerful, most important thing you could be doing is spending time engaging with learners. And if AI can be a way to free teachers of some of those other of administrative tasks, or to simplify tasks that teachers have to do to make more time for the really important human to human learning interactions, I think that's great. I think that's an exciting thing. And I know that there are companies and tools that are emerging for that. I've talked to teachers and teacher leaders who are coming up with really innovative ways to use AI to develop those tools for themselves. And I think that's great. I think there's also the promise of better student-facing supports and tools emerging from AI for similar reasons, if we do the R&D in thoughtful ways. And our newest AERDF program, Augment Ed, is actually thinking really deeply about this, about these questions. They're just at the beginning of their programmatic work, and they really want to answer the question of what is the role of AI, and the role of the teacher together as collaborators in the classroom of the future, that is centered in learning science and what we know is good for learning, that is good for students, and that really makes the most out of the strengths of the teacher and the strengths of the AI itself. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about what we're going to learn from that program. I'm excited about the potential to continue to explore that. On the other side, to contrast with the promise, I do think there is some peril that we don't know nearly enough about AI's impact on learning itself, on the process of learning, for young developing brains. We really don't know yet what impact it will have on a developing child's brain if AI does for them some of the work that they might otherwise have done themselves. If instead of a child reading a complex text, struggling through the reading of a complex text themselves, if they listen to it read to them, and that is the only way that they deal with complex text, how will a child's brain be different as a result of that? And what might be the longer term consequences of those changes to a child's brain? So those are real questions. They're research questions. They're not don't do AI kinds of questions, but they do demand that we be really doing focused R&D that is focused at this intersection of AI and learning. AI was not developed as a tool for learning, but for life. And we're using it in that way. And now, as we apply it to learning, we just have to understand much more there, that AI makes our lives easier. But if you make learning as a process easier, you actually undo some of what actually is required for learning. Things like
Mm.
productive struggle and dealing with some of the challenging bits is how learning happens. It is how young people learn. So I do think that we risk setting this expectation that things should be easy. AI makes things easy, and therefore it's great. But in a learning context, it may not be so great. And finally, the other worry I have, and I don't know that we talk about this enough, I really do worry that AI is going to exacerbate or create the next generation of the digital divide. Or we already have a digital divide. We've never really closed that digital divide. And there are potentially greater consequences as you think about who has access to the best access to learning to work with AI and who doesn't, and what that may mean for teachers, for school systems, and for learners.
Yeah, when you think about that workforce development piece and the learners that are not having the exposure that some of our large systems that are maybe more urban centered or near research
Yeah,
institutions, but in those communities that you grew up in that are rural and more removed, their teachers aren't getting the professional development necessarily. And as a result, the students are not preparing for the world that will exist upon graduation, which is very integrated with emerging technologies like AI. So I have that
yeah.
I share that same worry. Um, I'm thinking about the productive struggle element that you named, and I'm thinking about all the ways in which we're bound to learn very soon. As you said, this is a big research question. We're bound to learn like what implications AI has on learners grappling and having that productive struggle, what the implications are. I'm curious, is that the call to action for Augment Ed to study that, or does it have a different orientation that you're aiming to focus on?
Augment Ed's call to action is more to really understand what are the most effective and powerful ways for that are teacher defined and teacher designed for AI to be a tool to enable the kinds of learning experiences that we know we want in classrooms for learners to develop not just their content skills in different content domains, but also those durable skills that we think are so important. So it's really the Augmented is very much focused on AI as a tool and AI being used as a tool for learning. How can we do better R&D to understand what are the best uses of that tool in the context of developing the kinds of durable skills for learners? And so that's the focus. Now, part of that will be measuring learner how students are learning.
Sure.
So that is very much going to be one of the outcomes, and it's also going to be a set of infrastructure and tools for the field to do better R&D. So
Yeah,
Augmented has kind of a dual focus. Let's create better tools and ways of developing tools, but let's also create a shared R&D kind of platform and infrastructure for tool development to happen that is aligned with the principles of learning science and build that into that infrastructure. So I think that is one huge piece of what has to be answered around AI. The other piece that I was getting to about the actual changes to how we learn and the brain itself, that is a huge area for work. We have a new project that we are just early days of kicking off around the neuroscience and the future of learning. And we're right now kind of mapping the field and talking to experts in neuroscience to understand from them where the big questions are. I fully expect that this is going to be identified as an area that's ripe for research, and then we would push into that a little bit more intentionally. But it's, as I talk to people about where the research is and where it's needed, it's really on both sides. We need it on how do we get the tools to do what we need the tools to do to really support the kinds of learning environments that we want, and how do we get better at understanding the brain development piece of it. And the two are ultimately going to reinforce each other as we advance the learning sciences and think about what do we want, what do we want the classroom of the future overall to look like? And what do we need the classroom of the future to look like to get to the kinds of outcomes that we're going to need for, you mentioned workforce, you mentioned like the skills that people are going to need for the future, but the brain is still the brain. So we
sure.
have to still really, really understand that and understand how that piece of development happens.
When I hear you share this and the next kind of bend that you all are really applying resources to about neuroscience, and also the development of tools and aligning kind of the sector, I get so excited. One thing I often lament about is how fractionalized our industry is, because the fractionalization results in like really extreme versions of tools being pushed out, and really their applications are, and often because they don't center educators, their
Or
applications
absolutely.
are very narrow. Like
Yes.
who the tool is working for is so near it, like completely eliminates. So I get excited to think about a world in which there's more unity, there's more buy-in to a central set of research questions that our tools should be aiming to study in their applications. But I'm actually curious, Aditi, what your vision of, like, if AirDiff succeeds beyond your wildest expectations, what will the US education system look like in 10 years?
Oh, well, that I am very hopeful that this comes to pass in the way that I think it needs to for the future of our young people, and that reinforces some of the themes that we've already talked about. So first, if we're successful in 10 years, I think one core missing component right now in the way that we do education R&D is, first of all, we grossly underinvest in it. And we grossly underinvest in it because I think we grossly underestimate how hard it is. And we do view it exactly as you just described as very, very specific, separate, siloed things, instead of seeing it as what it is, like the hardest thing, the brain and learning and child development, as this huge, big, interconnected thing, which brings different disciplines together. We think it's about we think it's, we as a, you know, a country, as an education ecosystem, have
Sure.
come to see it as like, it's about putting a teacher in a classroom with the right tools and eager to learn students, and then the magic will happen. It's so much more than that. We have to really reorient our understanding of what education R&D is, so that it encompasses biological sciences, neuro and cognitive sciences, sociology, psychology, and invite all of those researchers in and enlist their expertise to understand and define and create the future of education R&D. And if we're successful, if AERDF is wildly successful, I think that will be one of the contributions to the field that we will have helped to support in partnership with many. We talk about our role being one of building and supporting a field, but part of that is really helping bring this cross sector, cross-disciplinary sector of researchers in to say, here are the big questions of human learning and development where we need your help and where we need to bring different ideas together, cross-pollinate ideas about research questions to answer, methodologies that we can bring into it. That's going to be a shift.
Mm.
That also requires new ways of being able to collaborate. So we are looking to build new infrastructure and tools to do the R&D itself. How can we make the doing of education R&D more efficient, streamlined, able for people to collaborate across? Look, this is becoming even more important because, as we well know, the education research sector has suffered major blows this year, much less investment being put
Mm.
there. We have education researchers in the Department of Education and elsewhere who are have skills to do research and methods that they know, and need ways for that work to continue to be sustained. And so, and our problems have not gotten any smaller. The demands of AI and everything else means we need as much, if not more, education R&D, and we need it to be faster and nimbler and more efficient than ever. So we need to create an infrastructure for that to happen. We need tools that allow education R&D to be more collaborative, more efficient, more nimble, more responsive, and able to kind of ask and answer the kinds of diverse questions that we've been talking about. And I would say, lastly, I if we are successful, if AERDF is successful in our own efforts and in bringing partners and thought leaders into this work with us, I think this conception of schools as a place that schools and learning environments as being places that are accountable to learners first and foremost will look radically different. We are accountable to learners. That is everybody's number one accountability in this work. And that should be the case for product developers, for researchers, for educators, for policymakers, for every single one of us. And that shift can only be enabled if we are all looking at problems and opportunities, and frankly, the brilliance and the potential of our learners together in new and different ways.
Well, the picture you're painting is really rosy. And I think, to be honest, we have to be rosy and optimistic because right now feels really hard for so many in education and many other sectors in the United States. And it's funny because I know personally some of the researchers who have been impacted by, cuts to their budgets or grants or whatnot. And the work still has to happen. We need to know. So
Absolutely.
I appreciate the picture you're painting because you are very clear about what is possible, and it gives us a good as I was telling my son the other day as we were setting goals for this school year, it gives us something ambitious to work towards, and that's always helpful in charting a path forward.
Yeah. I mean, we're all experiencing it. We're all seeing it happen to friends and colleagues and experiencing it. And we can throw up our hands and say, this is awful. Or I think, as most of us are doing, well, what can we do? And
Right,
what do we
right,
keep doing? And how do we use this moment to do better and
right.
to continue to improve and to iterate? And then that's certainly what we're doing. And I know that's what so many in the research community are doing. I really appreciate your shining a light on this.
Mm.
You're doing it, and I think this is absolutely how we get to set better methods, better collaboration, and better results on the other side of this.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate this that you're doing this. I think this is so incredibly important, and there is no more urgent call to action than our kids. And our kids have suffered significantly, both socially and emotionally and academically over the past
Yeah.
5 years. And so urgency is very necessary right now. And it's okay to feel like I tell people it's okay to feel down. It's okay to feel beaten by the situation or challenged. Take your break, take a deep breath, and kind of move forward. That's how I approach it. So, really
Yeah.
appreciate the work that's happening. And as my final question, Aditi, I'm wondering, what advice would you give a teacher who's just starting their career today?
Two things I would say to them. One, remember that every child is brilliant.
Mm,
Every child who passes into the doors of your classroom is brilliant. And your job as a teacher is to see and nurture that child's brilliance, even if it's in the smallest of ways. So that's number one. And number two, I would say pace yourself. Pace
mm,
yourself. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint. It's hard. Pace yourself.
amazing. You have such a powerful viewpoint in this ecosystem of education. I'm so glad you came on to share it here. Aditi, thank you so much for doing this work and also for just being such an inspiration for what we could do when we work together and really put students and teachers at the center of everything.
Thank you so much, Haley. I really enjoyed the conversation and look forward to seeing you in San Diego next year.
Yeah, me too. It's our new reunion spot. And thank you to everybody for tuning in today.